Ruth's alarm clock screamed at 5 in the morning. She opened her eyes in the darkness of her tiny apartment and felt a familiar weight pressed down on her chest. Today was Saturday. Today was the wedding. Today she had to be perfect, invisible, and quick. She stood up from the thin mattress on the floor and looked at her 2 children sleeping on the only bed in the room. 7-year-old Maya had her arm wrapped around 5-year-old Marcus. They looked peaceful like angels. Ruth's heart squeezed tight. She had 3 days left to pay the rent, or Mr. Johnson would throw them out onto the street. 3 days. The school had sent another letter about late fees. The electricity bill sat on the counter like a red warning sign. But today, she couldn't think about that. Today, she had to work. Ruth pulled on her blue cleaning uniform and her yellow rubber gloves. She tied her hair back tight and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. 42 years old, tired eyes, strong hands. She had been cleaning the Morrison mansion for 6 years now. 6 years of scrubbing marble floors and polishing silver forks and making everything sparkle for people who never looked at her face. Well, almost never. Mr. Jonathan Morrison, the groom, was different. He said good morning, Ruth, when he saw her. He asked about her children. Once, when Marcus was sick, Mr. Jonathan had given her extra money for the doctor. It's not charity, he had said with a kind smile. It's what decent people do. That memory kept Ruth going on hard days. It reminded her that not everyone in that big, beautiful house thought she was nothing. By 6 o'clock, Ruth was on the bus heading across town. The city was still sleeping, but the Morrison mansion would be waking up like a giant beast getting ready for the biggest day of its life. White roses everywhere. A crystal chandelier in every room. Marble floors so shiny you could see your face in them. Gold plates. Silk curtains. Everything that money could buy. When Ruth arrived, the mansion was already buzzing with activity. Florists carried huge arrangements of flowers. Men in black suits tested microphones. Women in fancy dresses rushed around with clipboards, shouting orders. Ruth slipped into the back door, the way she always did, and started her work. She cleaned the guest bathrooms first, scrubbed the toilets until they gleamed, wiped down the mirrors, folded the hand towels into perfect little swans, the way Mrs. Morrison liked them. Then she moved the hallways, dusting every picture frame, every vase, every statue. Nobody spoke to her. She might as well have been a ghost. By 9 o'clock, the wedding was only 3 hours away. Ruth's back ached and her knees hurt, but she kept moving. She had learned long ago that if you stopped, someone would yell at you. If you were seen, someone would find fault. The trick was to clean everything perfectly while remaining invisible. She was wiping down the banister near the 2nd floor when she heard laughter coming from the bridal suite. High, tinkling laughter like champagne glasses clinking together. Ruth knew she shouldn't go near there. The bride, Miss Victoria, had made it very clear that the help should stay away from her private spaces. But Mrs. Morrison had given Ruth specific instructions that morning. Make sure the bridal suite is absolutely spotless. I don't care if Victoria doesn't want you there. Do it while she's having breakfast. Ruth checked her watch. It was 9:15. The bride should be downstairs having breakfast with her bridesmaids by now. This was her chance. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and walked quietly down the hallway. The bridal suite door was closed, but not locked. Ruth could still hear voices inside. Her heart sank. They hadn't gone to breakfast yet. She would have to come back later. But then she heard something that made her freeze. "Oh my God, Victoria, you're glowing," one of the bridesmaids squealed. "You must be so in love." Ruth knew she should walk away. She knew she should leave right now and come back later. But something in Victoria's voice when she answered made Ruth's feet stop moving. In love. Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was cold, like ice cracking. "Please, I'm in love with his money, not with him." Ruth's blood turned cold. She stood perfectly still in the hallway, her cleaning supplies heavy in her hands. She shouldn't be hearing this. She should leave, but her body wouldn't move. "Victoria!" Another bridesmaid gasped, but she was laughing too. "You can't say that." "Why not? It's just us girls here." Victoria said. Ruth could hear the champagne bottle popping open. Look, Jonathan is nice enough. He's boring, but he's nice. And more importantly, he's rich. Once we're married, I'll have access to everything. The houses, the cars, the bank accounts. And then what? A third voice asked. Victoria's voice dropped lower, but Ruth could still hear every word through the door. And then I'll have what I really want. Marco and I can finally be together. We've been planning this for months. Jonathan has no idea. He thinks I'm this perfect, innocent bride. He has no idea that I've been seeing Marco this whole time. The bridesmaids exploded with shocked giggles. You're terrible, one of them said, but they all sounded impressed, not upset. I'm smart. Victoria corrected. Marco doesn't have money. Jonathan does. So I marry Jonathan, wait a respectable amount of time, then divorce him and take half of everything. It's simple math, girls. Love doesn't pay the bills. Money does. Ruth felt like she couldn't breathe. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Mr. Jonathan, the kind man who had helped her when Marcus was sick, the only person in this mansion who treated her like a human being, was about to marry a woman who was using him, a woman who didn't love him, a woman who was planning to take everything from him. Does Jonathan suspect anything? A bridesmaid asked. Jonathan? Victoria laughed again, that cold, terrible laugh. Jonathan is clueless. He's so trusting, so good, so noble. He actually believes in love. It's almost sad, but that's what makes this so easy. In 3 hours, I'll say I do, and my whole life will change. Our whole lives will change. The bridesmaids cheered and clinked their glasses together. Ruth finally made her legs move. She backed away from the door, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped her bucket. She walked quickly down the hallway, down the back stairs, and into the supply closet where nobody could see her. She sat down on an overturned mop bucket and put her head in her hands. What was she supposed to do now? She knew the truth. She knew that Miss Victoria was lying to Mr. Jonathan. She knew that in 3 hours, a good man was going to marry a woman who only wanted his money. But who would believe Ruth? She was just the cleaning lady. She was nobody. If she spoke up, Victoria would deny everything. The bridesmaids would call her a liar. Mrs. Morrison would fire her immediately. And then what? How would she feed her children? How would she pay rent? How would they survive? Ruth's mother's voice echoed in her memory. Baby girl. Her mama used to say, we might not have money, but we have something more important. We have truth. And truth is the one thing nobody can take from you unless you give it away. But truth was expensive. Truth could cost Ruth everything. She heard footsteps above her head. The wedding guests were starting to arrive. In 3 hours, Mr. Jonathan would stand at the altar with a woman who was betraying him before the marriage even began. Ruth squeezed her eyes shut and tried to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. Ruth stayed in the supply closet for 10 minutes, trying to steady her shaking hands. Her mind was racing like a runaway train. Every thought crashed into the next one, making her head hurt. Tell him. Don't tell him. Tell him. Don't tell him. Finally, she stood up. She had work to do. The mansion wouldn't clean itself, and if she disappeared for too long, someone would come looking for her. Ruth had learned that the best way to think was to keep her hands busy, so she grabbed her supplies and went back to work. She cleaned the grand staircase, polishing each wooden rail until it shined. Her mind kept playing Victoria's words over and over again. I'm in love with his money, not with him. Marco and I can finally be together. Jonathan is clueless. Ruth scrubbed harder, as if she could scrub away what she had heard. By 10 o'clock, the mansion was filling with guests. Rich people in expensive clothes walked past Ruth like she was a piece of furniture. She moved from room to room, emptying trash cans, straightening chairs, picking up champagne glasses that careless guests left on priceless tables. And all the while, her heart felt like it was being torn in two. If she told Mr. Jonathan what she had heard, everything would fall apart. Victoria would deny it. She would say Ruth was lying, maybe even say Ruth was trying to cause trouble because she was jealous or crazy. The bridesmaids would back Victoria up. They would all stand together, 4 rich women in fancy dresses against one poor cleaning lady in a blue uniform. Who would people believe? Ruth knew the answer. She had lived it her whole life. 3 years ago, Mrs. Morrison's diamond earring had gone missing. Everyone immediately looked at Ruth. "She's the only one who cleans a bedroom," Mrs. Morrison had said, her voice sharp with suspicion. She must have taken it. Ruth had stood there, her face hot with shame, while Mrs. Morrison searched her bag, her pockets, even made her take off her shoes. They found nothing because Ruth had taken nothing. She had never stolen anything in her life. 2 days later, Mrs. Morrison found the earring under her own dresser, where it had fallen. Did she apologize to Ruth? No. She just said, "Well, I'm glad we found it," and walked away. Ruth had never forgotten that feeling. The feeling of being accused. The feeling of being guilty just because she was poor and black and worked with her hands. If she spoke up now, that feeling would come back 100 times worse. But if she stayed silent, Ruth thought about Mr. Jonathan's face, his kind eyes, his gentle voice when he asked about her children. "How's Maya doing in school, Ruth? Is Marcus feeling better?" He was a good man, maybe the only truly good person in this entire mansion. And he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Ruth finished cleaning the downstairs parlor and moved toward the chapel where the wedding would take place. It was beautiful. White roses covered every surface. Silk ribbons hung from the ceiling. Candles flickered in golden holders. The chairs were arranged in perfect rows, and each one had a little white cushion tied to it with a bow. It looked like a fairy tale. But Ruth knew the truth. Fairy tales weren't real. This wedding was built on lies. She was arranging flowers near the altar when she heard Mr. Jonathan's voice behind her. "Ruth, there you are." She turned around, and her heart squeezed tight. He looked so happy. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and his face was glowing with joy. He looked like a man who believed he was about to marry the love of his life. "The chapel looks amazing," he said, smiling at her. "You've done such a wonderful job." "Thank you." Ruth tried to smile back, but her face felt frozen. "Just doing my job, Mr. Jonathan." "Well, you do it better than anyone." He paused and looked at her more closely. "Are you okay? You look worried." This was her chance. Right now, she could tell him. She could say, "Mr. Jonathan, I need to talk to you. I heard something this morning. Something about Miss Victoria." The words were right there in her throat. Try to come out. But then she thought about Maya and Marcus. She thought about the rent money she didn't have. She thought about the electricity bill and the school fees and the landlord's warning. She thought about her children sleeping on the street because their mother had spoken up and lost her job. "I'm fine," Ruth heard herself say. "Just tired. It's been a busy morning." Mr. Jonathan nodded, still smiling. "Well, after today, you can rest. Take tomorrow off, okay? You've earned it." And Ruth, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. A bonus for all your hard work and for being so good to my family all these years." Ruth took the envelope with trembling hands. She could feel the money inside, money she desperately needed. "Thank you, Mr. Jonathan," she whispered. "No, thank you." He checked his watch. "I should go. The wedding starts in less than an hour. Wish me luck." He walked away, whistling a happy tune. Ruth stood there holding the envelope, and she felt like the worst person in the world. She opened it. Inside were 10 crisp $100 bills. $1,000. Enough to pay rent. Enough to cover the school fees. Enough to keep the electricity on for months. Blood money, Ruth thought. That's what her mama would have called it. Money earned by staying silent when she should have spoken. Ruth walked slowly back to the supply closet. She sat down again on the overturned bucket. She put the envelope in her pocket and felt its weight like a stone. Her mother had died 5 years ago, but Ruth could still hear her voice as clear as day. Mama had worked as a maid, too, for 40 years. She had cleaned rich people's houses and raised Ruth by herself after Ruth's father left them. Baby girl. Mama used to say when Ruth was young, people like us were invisible to them. They don't see us. We clean their messes, we wash their clothes, we cook their food, but they look right through us like we're ghosts. That's not fair, Mama, young Ruth had said. No, it's not fair, but that's how it is. So we have to decide what kind of ghosts we're going to be. We can be the kind that just float around, quiet and forgotten, or we can be the kind that stand up and make noise when something is wrong, even if they don't want to hear us, even if it costs us something. What if it costs us everything? Ruth had asked. Mama had looked at her with serious eyes. Then we pay the price. Because some things are more important than everything. Ruth sat in the closet, tears running down her face. She thought about Mr. Jonathan's happy smile. She thought about Victoria's cold laugh. She thought about Maya and Marcus sleeping peacefully in their bed, not knowing that their mother had to choose between feeding them and telling the truth. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But fair or not, Ruth had to make a choice. She stood up. She wiped her tears. She took off her yellow gloves and folded them carefully. Then she walked out of the supply closet. The wedding was about to begin. Guests were filing into the chapel, finding their seats. Organ music started playing, soft and sweet. Ruth could see Victoria at the back of the chapel in her enormous white dress, holding a bouquet of roses, her face hidden behind a veil. Ruth's hands were shaking again. Her legs felt weak. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. But she kept walking. She had made her choice. Now she had to be brave enough to follow through. Ruth slipped into the back of the chapel and stood against the wall where the servants always stood during family events. Invisible, unseen, just part of the background. But not for long. The organ music grew louder. Victoria started walking down the aisle on her father's arm. Every head turned to watch her. She looked like a princess in a storybook, beautiful and perfect and pure. Ruth knew better. Mr. Jonathan stood at the altar, his face glowing with love and hope and trust. He believed in the woman walking toward him. He believed in goodness and honesty and happily ever after. He believed in a lie. The minister stood at the altar in his white robes, holding a Bible. Dearly beloved, he began, we are gathered here today. Ruth took a deep breath. Her whole body was shaking now. She thought about her children one more time. She thought about her mother. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to be. Then she stepped forward from the wall. Stop, Ruth said. Her voice came out quiet, almost a whisper. Nobody heard her. The minister kept talking. Victoria kept smiling behind her veil. Ruth tried again, louder this time. Stop. Please stop. A few heads turned toward her. Someone gasped. Ruth saw Mrs. Morrison's face go red with anger. But Ruth didn't stop. She couldn't stop now. Please, Ruth said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. Please stop the wedding. I have something important to say. The chapel fell silent. Every single person turned to stare at Ruth. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging her, wondering who this cleaning lady thought she was to interrupt such an important moment. Ruth's legs felt like water. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But she kept standing there, even though every part of her wanted to run away and hide. What is the meaning of this? Mrs. Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a knife. She stood up from her seat in the front row, her face twisted with fury. Ruth, how dare you interrupt this wedding? The minister looked confused. Mr. Jonathan looked shocked. And Victoria, still standing halfway down the aisle in her white dress, slowly lifted her veil. Her face was pale, and her eyes were hard as stones. Mrs. Morrison, Ruth said, her voice trembling, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I have to speak. I have to tell the truth. The truth? Victoria's voice was sweet as honey, but Ruth could hear the danger underneath. What truth could you possibly have to share? You're the cleaning lady. Those words stung. You're just the cleaning lady. You're nobody. You don't matter. But Ruth thought about her mama. She thought about Maya and Marcus. She thought about Mr. Jonathan's kindness. And she found her courage. This morning, Ruth began, I was cleaning upstairs. I heard voices coming from the bridal suite. I didn't mean to listen. I was just doing my job. But I heard Miss Victoria talking to her bridesmaids. Victoria's face went even paler. The bridesmaids looked at each other with wide, frightened eyes. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, but her voice shook just a little. "She's lying. She's trying to ruin my wedding because she's jealous or mentally unstable." "I'm not lying," Ruth said firmly. She looked directly at Mr. Jonathan. His face was confused and hurt, like he couldn't understand what was happening. "Mr. Jonathan, I heard Miss Victoria say that she doesn't love you. She said she's in love with your money, not with you. She said she has a boyfriend named Marco, and she's planning to marry you, then divorce you and take half of everything you have." The chapel exploded with noise. People gasped and whispered and pointed. Mrs. Morrison started shouting. Victoria's father looked like he might faint. The bridesmaids huddled together, their faces guilty. "That's a lie." Victoria screamed. Her sweet voice was gone now, replaced by something ugly and sharp. "She's making it up. Why would you believe some random cleaning woman over me? She probably wants money from us. This is blackmail." But Mr. Jonathan wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was looking at Ruth. His eyes were searching her face, trying to understand. "Ruth," he said quietly, and the chapel fell silent again. Everyone wanted to hear what he would say. "Ruth, are you absolutely certain about what you heard?" Ruth's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. This was it. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or come together. If Mr. Jonathan didn't believe her, she would lose everything. Her job, her home, her children's future. But if she lied now, she would lose something even more important. She would lose herself. "Yes, Mr. Jonathan." Ruth said clearly, "I'm certain. I heard Miss Victoria say those exact words. She said you were clueless. She said she was smart because she was marrying you for your money while planning to be with Marco. She said love doesn't pay the bills, but money does. I heard every word." Mr. Jonathan turned slowly to face Victoria. "Is this true?" "Of course it's not true," Victoria said, but her voice was too high, too desperate. "Jonathan, baby, you know me. You know I love you. This woman is crazy. She's just a help. She probably heard wrong, or she's trying to get money from us by causing a scene." "The bridesmaids heard everything too," Ruth added softly. "They were laughing about it. They were celebrating. Ask them." Everyone turned to look at the bridesmaids. 3 young women in pink dresses, their faces red with guilt and fear. "Tell him," Ruth said to them. "Tell Mr. Jonathan the truth." The bridesmaids looked at each other. Then they looked at Victoria. Then they looked at the floor. "Well," Mr. Jonathan's voice was cold now, harder than Ruth had ever heard it. "Did Victoria say those things or not?" The tallest bridesmaid, the one who had been laughing the loudest that morning, started crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Jonathan. She did say those things. We thought it was just talk. We didn't think she was serious." Victoria's face changed. The sweetness vanished completely. In its place was something cold and angry and mean. "You idiot," she hissed at her bridesmaid. Then she turned to Jonathan. "Fine, you want the truth? Here's the truth. Yes, I'm marrying you for your money. Yes, I have someone else. But so what? This is how the world works, Jonathan. Love is for poor people in fairy tales. I need security. I need wealth. And you're too boring and too trusting to give me anything else." The chapel was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Mr. Jonathan stood at the altar, his face frozen in shock and pain. He looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" Victoria blinked. "I said get out." Mr. Jonathan's voice grew stronger, louder. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. This wedding is over." Victoria's face twisted with rage. "You're going to regret this. My father is a lawyer. I'll sue you for breach of promise. I'll take everything anyway." "Try it," Mr. Jonathan said coldly. "I have 300 witnesses who just heard you admit that you were committing fraud. Now get out before I call the police." Victoria stood there for a moment, her face ugly with anger. Then she grabbed her enormous white dress, turned around and stormed out of the chapel. Her bridesmaids and her father hurried after her. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor echoed through the silent room. Then she was gone. Mr. Jonathan stood at the altar, looking lost and broken. Then he turned and looked at Ruth, who was still standing against the wall, trembling from head to toe. He walked toward her slowly. The guests parted to let him through. Ruth couldn't read his face. Was he angry? Grateful? She couldn't tell. When he reached her, he did something that shocked everyone in the chapel. He took her hand. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for having the courage to tell me the truth. Thank you for saving me from the biggest mistake of my life. I know what this cost you. I know you risked everything to speak up. I will never forget that." Tears poured down Ruth's face. "I couldn't let her hurt you, Mr. Jonathan. You've been nothing but kind to me and my family. You're a good man. You deserve someone who truly loves you." Mr. Jonathan smiled, even though his eyes were sad. "You're a good woman, Ruth. The best person in this whole mansion. And from now on, things are going to change around here." He turned to face the shocked guests. "Everyone, this is Ruth. She's been cleaning this house for 6 years, and I never properly appreciated her until today. She showed more integrity in 5 minutes than some people show in their entire lives. From now on, Ruth is not just the cleaning lady. She's part of this family, and I'm going to make sure she and her children are taken care of." The guests began to clap, slowly at first, then louder and louder until the whole chapel was filled with applause. Ruth stood there, crying and smiling at the same time, hardly able to believe what was happening. Mrs. Morrison stood up, her face softer than Ruth had ever seen it. "I owe you an apology, Ruth," she said. "I should have listened to you years ago when that earring went missing. I'm sorry for how I treated you. You have more character than I gave you credit for." Ruth nodded, accepting the apology. Over the next few weeks, everything changed for Ruth. Mr. Jonathan kept his promise. He gave her a raise and paid off her rent and her children's school fees. He set up a college fund for Maya and Marcus. He even helped her move into a better apartment with real bedrooms and windows that didn't leak when it rained. But more than that, people in the mansion started treating Ruth differently. They learned her name. They said good morning. They thanked her for her work. She was no longer invisible. Mr. Jonathan eventually found real love with a woman who saw him for who he truly was, not for what he owned. And at their wedding 2 years later, Ruth wasn't standing against the wall in her blue uniform. She was sitting in the front row as an honored guest, wearing a beautiful dress that Mr. Jonathan had bought for her. As Ruth watched him say, "I do," to someone who truly loved him, she thought about that terrible morning when she had to choose between safety and truth. She thought about how scared she had been, how close she had come to staying silent. But she had spoken up. She had been brave, and that bravery had changed everything. Her mama had been right. Truth was the one thing nobody could take from you unless you gave it away. And Ruth had kept hers. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room speaks the loudest truth. Sometimes the person everyone ignores is the one who saves the day. And sometimes courage doesn't look like a superhero in a cape. Sometimes it looks like a tired cleaning lady in a blue uniform, standing up when everyone expects her to stay silent. That's what makes it real courage. That's what makes it matter. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this post, share it with someone who needs to hear about courage and truth, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us that every voice matters, no matter how small. What would you have done in Ruth's position? Let us know in the comments below.